My name is Max Pearl, and I've been practicing and teaching contemplative practices in both the Buddhist and Christian traditions for almost 15 years now. I've also been engaged in sort of an ongoing study for me, for my own self and well-being, embodiment practices. And I've begun to incorporate those into my work. So,
how did you find this? I know you said some of this has something to do with your own personal journey, but how did you steer into this?
Well, so about, let's see, 10 years ago, not quite, about 7 years ago, my former partner and I started a company called Conscious Girlfriend, which was designed to focus around providing relationship and dating skills for lesbians, because I was a lesbian, and I'm trans. So yeah, so I was lesbian, identify as lesbian, and that we came to that because I have a PhD in neuroscience, and I've been very interested in sort of what's called interpersonal neuroscience, which is the way in which our brain affects how we communicate, how we respond, our emotions. And so incorporating that into sort of more psychological framework, which my former partner brought with it. And so that got me into doing coaching and workshops around emotional awareness, self-love, self-compassion, and in that context, relationships and dating. And then when I decided to transition about 4 years ago, I took a pause from that work, and since I no longer obviously identify as a lesbian, because it's hard to be a lesbian and a man at the same time, I took a break from that work because I didn't feel ready to sort of engage with that at any level. But now that my transition has progressed, and I'm sort of in a much more stable place, I thought, wow, I'd like to actually provide this kind of work for the trans and gender expansive community. I think it's so important from my perspective. Emotional awareness, embodiment, it's all a part of creating joy in our lives. And as a group of people who are oppressed and looked at in sort of negative ways, there's so many societal messages that are negative, and so being able to counteract those messages and find ways to joy is important, I think, and is in fact itself radical. So that's why I'm doing this work.
Wow. So now that you're 4 years into your journey, or your transition, how has a place like Wellcelium really make a difference in someone who has walked in your shoes?
So for me, the process of coming to love my body, to fully inhabit my body, and be able to actually inhabit my sexuality has been a really central part of my journey. And I was introduced to Pavani's work quite a while ago, and I've been sort of really embarking on a process of learning about my own authentic sexuality and what it means and what it is. For me, I was very constrained before I transitioned, and very much like I was trying to find my way to that authentic sexuality and authentic embodiment, but it wasn't happening. I sort of hit a ceiling, and it's like, no, you can't go any further. And then came to realize, oh, this is because I actually needed to transition. So my story around transition is an important one because I spent many years really working to love my body as it was, sort of work into what was true for me, but I sort of ignored that I had dysphoria. I sort of pushed it aside and didn't pay attention to it. It was learning to embrace the dysphoria, learning to sort of say, oh yeah, this is an essential part of my experience. That is what allowed me to say, oh, I can actually make decisions about this thing that's true for me. Before, when I was just pushing it away, I couldn't do anything about it really. But when I was able to really embrace it and say, oh yeah, here's this thing, this is what's true for you, that was when I was able to make better choices for myself around dysphoria and around transition.
Wow, that's beautiful. So what type of classes do you teach? Or will be teaching?
So I teach classes largely around self-love, self-compassion, emotional awareness, and increasingly on learning to deal with dysphoria and just toward general embodiment, learning to inhabit our bodies as they are in this moment as trans and gender expansive people. Because our bodies are, in a way, they are really sort of a locus of conflict, both internal conflict, our own conflict with our bodies and our bodies as not quite what we feel like they should be, as well as external conflict. People are like, always asking about our genitals or, that sort of, there's external conflict around our bodies too. And so as the locus of conflict, learning to come to a place of authenticity around our bodies is so important, because it's like we can just say this is true for me and really stand in that knowledge of our bodies and our bodies as ours. These are ours to live in, ours to claim, ours to be in.
That's beautiful. Do you wish that you could have done this years ago, or do you feel like the time that you did it is when it was supposed to happen?
Yes, and I mean, clearly the time I did it was the right time. But of course, yes, I wish that I had been ready to do it 20 or 30 years ago. What's true is that 20 or 30 years ago, it was also much more difficult to do it. So not only was I not in a place personally where I could do it, it was also so much harder to do. So I think what doing it, 4 years ago it was the right time, and it was also not hard, at least in Northern California. That's not true everywhere in the country, but it was certainly true.
So I know one of the things that I love about Wellcelium is the body positivity, but also the sexual liberation and the freedom of that. So did you experience that on this side of your transition, or was that something that was stifled because you couldn't?
It was totally stifled before I transitioned. And as I was able to transition, I was able to come into what is becoming much more my authentic sexuality. And that was really a fabulous experience for me to learn more about what was true for me sexually, and really kind of do feel definitely liberated in terms of what I was able to do and what I was able to experience sexually. So it was a huge thing for me. And that's, as I was saying, it's one of the things I love about Wellcelium is that real positivity about sexuality and embodiment and coming to what's true for us in happiness and joy.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. So the title for your classes, or I guess you can talk about the titles of your classes, and it says trans and gender expansive folks. So does that mean that your classes are only for trans and gender expansive community members, or everyone? Okay.
So so my classes are centered for folks who are trans and gender expansive. And I do think that cis people can benefit from the kinds of things that I teach, but that's not my focus. And also not my experience. My experience is being trans. And so I want to bring that experience to what I teach. And that's really the focus for me.
Love that. And what can the students who participate in your class expect or gain or learn?
Yeah, so what I try to introduce is, number one, a set of concepts around learning to be more aware of one's emotions, where emotions are in the body, cultivating self-compassion, because I think difficult emotions are often hard for people to tolerate. And so cultivating self-compassion around difficult emotions, and also giving people practices to help them enter in their bodies and really be in their bodies and connect to their bodies in a way that's experimental and self-compassionate and also non-judgmental. I think certainly trans folks have so many judgments about our bodies because they in many situations our bodies don't fit our own idea of what our bodies should be or what we want our bodies to be, and giving practices to help folks learn how to accept and embody their bodies as they are in this moment, even if they're going to have surgery later or they have plans later or they're going to be taking hormones later. it's like learning, and because it's a from my perspective, transition is not a destination, it's a journey, and it's an ongoing journey. And so at each stage our bodies are changing, and whether or not we do medical transition or not, our bodies and our concept of our bodies in the process of inhabiting our true gender is going to change, and it's going to be a journey. It's going to move as we grow. And so learning how to really accept, embrace our bodies, inhabit our bodies at every step of that journey is part of what I teach.
Could you define what trans and gender expansive community means?
So trans is someone who's decided to go from the gender they were assigned at birth to the gender that's correct for them, whatever that is. It could be the opposite gender. It could be to transition to non-binary. Some people who are non-binary identify as trans, and some don't, and that's okay. Gender expansive is gender queer, people who feel as if the gender that our rigid gender structure in our society of just binary gender doesn't fit them in some way or another. Maybe it's that they move between genders a lot, or maybe it's that they are transitioning fully from one to the other, or they're inhabiting some space that's in between, or they have no gender. Some people feel like they have no gender. And so anybody who fits into that category is sort of trans and gender expansive. That's how I define it. And it's the self-identification. If somebody identifies that way, that's great. So.
Got it. All right. So our supportive partners, friends, and family welcome if they want to learn more about the trans and gender expansive community.
So my workshops are not designed to be educational at all. And so, I mean, again, it's very much centered for trans and gender expansive people. I think if somebody wanted to show up, that's fine, but they're not going to learn anything. I mean, they might learn something just by osmosis, but I'm not going to do any education about what it means to be trans. That's not what this is about. So, I mean, I get my interesting to have somebody who's a partner or spouse or family member. I think it's important that they would know, though, that that it's not about educating them, and that they really should take the experience for themselves and for their own sense of emotional awareness or embodiment, and they can learn a little bit about the experience that their partner might be having, but that's not the goal. Is not to educate people.
So in other words, you are dedicating these classes, your expertise, to people who are in your journey or part of your journey or
very much
identify with your journey. I love that.
Very much.
So it's like, I'm sorry, this is my target audience. I'm here to help them.
Yes.
Love
yes.
That.
Yep.
That. If you glean something, if you're a supportive partner or member, we appreciate the support, but this is for them. I like that.
Yes.
Yep. So I think I already asked you that. Okay. So so what are the names of your classes? And how many classes will you teach and how often?
So that's a good question. I mean, the first class that I'm teaching is, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the title, but it's about loving ourselves and our bodies as trans and gender expansive folks. And there are other classes that I certainly could teach. I would love to teach a course that's specifically around focusing on dysphoria and sexuality. And I haven't, we haven't talked about designing that class, but I'd love to teach that sort of thing. I do a lot of work on self-love and self-compassion, and just that focused process of helping folks, trans and gender expansive folks, learn to grow skills around self-love and self-compassion and self-care. So that's something I do focus on quite a bit. I have done a little bit on, because I had this long experience of working with folks on dating and relationships. Mm-hmm. So I haven't yet incorporated that, but I would love to teach a class on dating while trans. It's something that I haven't really dived into in this era of COVID, because people aren't really, but eventually when this passes, I do want to do stuff around dating while trans, and relationships while trans.
So I love that. Now, one more question about teaching people in this community, members of this community, to love themselves. It's hard for anybody to love themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I can only imagine that being just compounded.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it is hard. I think one of the things about this culture is that we don't actually get a lot of, we don't learn how to love ourselves. We learn how to compete with other people. We learn how to judge ourselves, against some stupid standard that is impossible to reach. And so we don't have that sort of foundation in our society. And so learning to love ourselves, be compassionate toward ourselves is hard. I totally agree. And I think the great thing though is that there are ways to cultivate that. There are techniques and tools that are available to cultivate that, and it doesn't actually matter who you are. Those tools work. And I think the thing that I like about doing this work for our community is that as somebody who is in it and has had the experience of dysphoria, so the experience of being trans, people relate to it better, relate to me, relate to my journey. But the truth is the tools that I teach are tools that work for anybody in any situation. So, so, and they're tools, I don't know, I haven't talked about this at all. As I said, I have a PhD in neuroscience. And so the neuroscience of the tools is really interesting and important to me. And the practices I teach actually have been, some of them, to the compassion of the sort of Buddhist-based compassion practices have been shown to actually change your brain. And so there's actually, where is it? I don't have it. Somewhere. There's a whole book I have on the neuroscience of self-compassion. So it actually, yeah.
That will make a really good class.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Really make a good class. Because sometimes I don't think we understand, like, I know manifesting and vibrations and all that. If you think about the meditation and the power that we have within ourselves as people, I can only imagine if we were able to put that into like the brain aspect of it and how we can change it from there.
Yep. There's some really interesting research around that. Yeah.
Interesting. So what gives you the most joy now? Like, what brings you joy now?
What brings me the most joy is when I'm working with people and they have an aha moment about a practice or a concept which helps them love themselves better. That's my joy. That's what I really love, and what makes all this worth doing.
Yeah. I'm hugging my screen right now, just so you know. This has been such a great conversation.